Chapter 61 Train, Hyena. You are listening at Audio. A sharp whistle sounded and all the train doors were closed. The front of the car sprayed steam and began to move forward with a clang. Wade waved out from the window and watched his father's figure gradually go away. He turned around and sat down, his heart heavy. The book of friends felt faintly warm. After opening it, I saw that there were several more sentences on the first page. Fiona, is the road going smoothly? The train should have already departed, right? Fiona, Miss Ava seems a little unhappy. I think it may be because you didn't bring her with you. Fiona, is it cold on the train? Wade smiled, took out his pen and replied sentence by sentence. Vede, we had a smooth trip. The train just left, and Dad should be on his way home already. If Miss Ava is unhappy, maybe you can feed her some dried fish. That was her favorite snack. I remember it was on the second floor of the cabinet. Or some scarabs or dried locusts, and she'll be happy too. Just don't eat too much, or it may cause gastrointestinal problems. Of course, you must know these. In addition, there was probably a warmth charm to maintain the temperature on the train, so it wasn't cold and the scarf was also very warm. I will remember to take more photos. Hi, Vader. When Vader was about to stop writing, Michael poked his head in and said happily, I knew you should be in this direction, guys. Here. He waved in the other direction, then dragged the box into the car and said excitedly, it's big news, isn't it, Wade? What? Wade was a little confused. Of course it's the Book of Friends. Michael pulled out his wand, let the box float to the luggage rack and put it away. He sat down and said, before school started, my parents were in a hurry to buy a copy. When they knew I had a whole copy in my hand, I was so surprised. But I thought it was a secret among SSC members, but I suddenly heard that it was on sale in Diagon Alley, so the rumor is true, right? What rumors? Wade found that after not seeing each other for 3 weeks, he couldn't keep up with Michael's topics. Oh, we've all heard about it. Some people came up to me and asked me, because they knew we were in the same grade. Theo also entered the door at this time, and continued, but I have to say, they all looked like I didn't really believe it. I thought someone was lying. Hi, Vader. Long time no see. Ryan followed in and said, I guess you rarely look at the SSC chat page. Well, because I still want to read a book. Wade asked. I guess that's it, otherwise you wouldn't be able to say nothing. Ryan shrugged. Let Theo explain, he knows better. Theo Mancini, although his surname is not among the legendary 28 saints, he is actually a pure blood and is relatively well informed. That's right, there were rumors before the Book of Friends came out. Theo looked at Wade and said, they said that there will be a new, cheaper, and more convenient communication method that may break the today's loose structure among wizards, makes the relationship between people closer. Michael said, I guessed at that time, whether they were talking about the Book of Friends. So even though he had a Book of Friends in his hand, he didn't dare to give it to his parents or friends. Instead, he kept it at the bottom of the box. Every day, he took out the Book of Friends and secretly chatted with his friends on the pretext of saying that he needed to study, and told them not to use the Book of Friends as a gift. The account is revealed. But at that time, except for Michael, whose friend list was all in his own hands, everyone else had at least given 1 page to their parents. So everyone hurriedly patched up the matter and told their parents to keep it a secret. Unexpectedly, after 2 or 3 days, the gossip seemed to spread all over the world, and everyone knew about it. In those days, our flow powder was used up several times faster than usual. Ryan said, many people wanted to get involved. My father said he knew a pure-blood noble who tried every means to get it. Agency to the Americas. But the owner of Aslan's magic workshop, Marchione, is a cunning and unpredictable character. This is my grandfather's assessment. Theo continued, he said that Marchione is like a hyena. If anyone messes with him, he will take the enemy's intestines out of his ass. Mancini's grandfather's words were actually more vulgar, and Theo was too embarrassed to repeat them, so he just kept it vague. No one dared to mess with Marchione, no one had ever taken advantage of him. However, some people said that Marchione also obtained the authorization for the Book of Friends patent from others, and the inventor also just a first-year student at Hogwarts. Theo looked at Vader. Someone is trying to find you like crazy. I was really afraid of hearing your name at that time, Vader. Ryan said with a bit of worry. Theo continued, but the great alchemist Terence Murray publicly stated at a banquet that the inventor was his student, and he would never tolerate anyone causing trouble to his students. If it would be considered an insult and a provocation to Terence Murray for anyone to go around him to find his students, Ryan added, it was only after this that I learned that Professor Murray has a very high status in some fields, and there is also Dumbledore in Hogwarts. At this point, a witch who was pushing a cart selling snacks passed by the door. They stopped talking and everyone bought some snacks. Then the interrupted topic continued. Professor Dumbledore also said that he hoped everyone could respect his students, otherwise he would have no choice but to defend the rights of his students. Suddenly everything was calm again. Theo said as he unwrapped the chocolate frog, I heard that those who have ideas are now looking for Marchione again. Maybe they think that the cost of provoking Marchione is lower. Oh, my chocolate frog. The frog jumped out suddenly, and Theo hurried to catch it but failed to catch it. Finally, Wade stopped it before it jumped out of the window. Thank you, Wade. Wade handed over the chocolate frog and asked, so, my name hasn't been spread? Most people don't know. Many of them thought I was a 6th or 7th grade student. Ryan said, but I guess it shouldn't be hidden from those pure-blood nobles, even if Professor Dumbledore and Professor Murray say so. But Wade, you'd better not be alone in school. Michael put his arm around Wade's shoulders and said with a smile, don't worry, we will be inseparable like conjoined twins. By the way, brother, it is rumored that Marchione spent a lot of galleons to buy the usage fee. Some people say that you are rich enough to rival a country. Is that true? When the other two avoided the topic, he asked frankly. Wade tried to speak calmly and not to sound boastful. It's not that exaggerated, only 50,000 galleons. Michael grinned as if he had a toothache. 50,000 galleons. I have never seen so much money in my life. Theo smiled relaxedly. Some people say it's 1,000,000 galleons. What nonsense. Ryan suddenly pressed his shoulder, and Theo stopped talking immediately. There was a knock on the door outside the carriage. Chapter 62 Pride and Prejudice. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Boom, boom, boom. There was a gentle knock on the carriage door. Theo, who was near the door, stood up and opened the door. Hello. Wade and others heard voices coming from outside. Mancini. Are you in this compartment? I heard Vader Gray is over here. It seems that I found the wrong one. I should go further ahead. The people outside were minding their own discussions and were going to look for him in other carriages, but an accidental glance allowed him to see Wade sitting inside. The student was startled for a moment, and the carelessness on his face turned into a warm smile in an instant dash. So you're really here? He squeezed past Theo and walked in with the other two people, as if they were familiar, and said, Hi, Gray, how was your vacation? Theo was squeezed into a corner and watched helplessly as 3 students who were much taller than him walked into the carriage. The space suddenly seemed cramped. Who are you? Wade raised his eyebrows slightly and was about to speak when Michael suddenly stopped him. He stood up and said with a smile, Long time no see, Pruitt. I heard you guys went to Iceland for Christmas. Pruitt then turned to look at him and said with a smile, Yes, I saw the impressive scenery. After I came back, I heard about the Book of Friends. He looked at Wade and said, It's so amazing. I immediately bought the full hardcover version of the Book of Friends. There are 12 books in total, corresponding to the 12 months of the year. Michael praised it cooperatively. As expected of the Pruitt family, even Marchione had to give in. We only got a limited edition copy. If we want to buy the second copy, I will have to wait until 2 weeks later. Don't worry, it won't be that long. As long as there is money to be made, Marchione will be as fast as riding a glaling. Of course, only the first batch of December's limited edition will be sold, and only selling to a truly ancient and noble pure-blood family is different from some. Well, it's different. He said arrogantly, glancing at Theo as if casually, the Mancini family is actually not that bad, at least much richer than the Weasley family. It's just that Theo was sorted into Hufflepuff and seemed to be labeled a fool and fool. He was immediately swept into the lower echelons of the contempt chain by these arrogant purebloods. Ryan's face was cold, and he was about to stand up, but Theo held his shoulders and stopped him from speaking. Michael didn't seem to understand what he meant and said with a smile, "The Pruitt family is indeed very old, these two are." The two people standing behind Pruitt kept looking at Vader with quite interested eyes, and sometimes looked at Michael. The two Hufflepuffs were completely ignored by them. Their scarves had large patches of green with silver stripes, and their expressions were somewhat gloomy. It was obvious that they were all Slytherins. Among several academies, the only one with a good relationship with Snake Academy is Ing Academy, but this is good because when they meet, they greet each other, say a few words, and are polite to each other. Not much. Pruitt was waiting for someone to ask, and immediately introduced, "This is Gaston Yaxley." The boy with blonde hair and thick eyebrows smiled at Wade and nodded. "This is O'Nell Foley." The boy with dark skin and a softer face smiled kindly. "They are all sixth-year Slytherin students. I heard that the inventor of the Book of Friends is in this compartment, so I wanted to come and get to know him," Pruitt said. Although he still had a smile on his face, he looked at Michael forcefully and signaled, "You kid, get out of the way." Michael could no longer block it, so he had to get out of the way. When he turned around, he winked at Vader, conveying the message silently. The boy named Gaston Yaxley stepped forward, stretched out his hand and said politely, "Hello, Mr. Gray." Under Michael's slightly nervous gaze, Wade stood up and shook hands. "Hello." Although the tone is flat, others will naturally be more tolerant of talented people, as long as you don't refuse in person. In Slytherin's eyes, it's a sign of friendship. A faint smile appeared on Yaxley's pale face. "I didn't expect the inventor of the Book of Friends to be so young. Ravenclaw has not had such an outstanding student for many years. Mr. Gray, you are truly capable and capable. Talented people will not be inferior to Terence Murray in the future. I think you need to be on a bigger stage to give full play to your wisdom." He paused and said in a long tone, "The Yaxley family is willing to provide you with some help." Although Pruitt was still smiling, a trace of jealousy could not be suppressed on his face. Michael looked at him, and then glanced at Foley on the other side. The Slytherin had an impeccable smile on his face, and no idea could be seen. "Thank you very much for your kindness. I am deeply honored," Wade said politely, "but I am only an apprentice in alchemy, and I am far from being able to compare with Professor Murray." "Of course, there is no doubt about Professor Murray's level, but I admire your future even more." Yaxley's words were unintentionally condescending. Although the alchemy level in the Book of Friends is very basic, many 6th and 7th grade students we are all capable of doing it, but what's more worthy of admiration is this wonderful idea. How did you come up with it? Vader nodded and said, "Speaking of this, I'm not actually the first. Do you know about the Muggle Internet?" Muggle? The faces of the three people changed almost at the same time, as if they had heard some polluting term. "Yes." Wade smiled and said, "The core protocol of Internet communication is TCP/IP protocol. By dividing the data into data packets for transmission, the client sends requests to the server, receives and parses the server's response. The server then returns the processed results to the client. The instruction sequence of the operation and the original data are in the process of input." Wade politely popularized the working principle of the computer, and then talked about the Internet, cloud computing, electronic chips, wide area network, data plane and other messy concepts, and also talked about the future of e-commerce, the deep integration of artificial intelligence and big data, blockchain technology and digital currency. He was the only one who spoke in this carriage, and everyone else opened their eyes blankly, as if they had become ignorant babies. Including some students who came here after hearing the news and wanted to meet Wade Gray. They all stood at the door and dared not come in, as if there was some strange seal here. When Wade stopped for a while, the three people who had resisted interrupting him out of politeness immediately stood up and said goodbye. Their faces were pale as if they had just been washed by a rainstorm. Their backs even looked a bit embarrassed as if they had fled in a panic. Theo walked over to close the door, and saw that the few people in the corridor hurriedly avoided his sight, as if they were afraid that he would pull them in and start to fill their brains with magic sounds. Theo closed the door and locked it with a spell, and the four people laughed at the same time. Chapter 63 Family, Death Eaters, and Witch Party. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Wonderful, so wonderful. Michael couldn't help giving a thumbs up. I thought you would just push it back. Vader didn't know when he made this Gryffindor impression on him. How much Slytherin holds grudges, just look at Malfoy and Potter. Vader shrugged, used a spell to isolate the sound of the carriage, then poured himself a glass of water, and said, I don't want to be in school. I was harassed by them every day. Theo nodded, you're right, Yaxley is a person who takes revenge, and unlike Malfoy, who likes to use some despicable means, even the professor has never caught him. His handle, Ryan, it's time for you to control your temper. Ryan curled his lips, neither agreeing nor objecting, and then asked, Vade, can that Muggle computer really do that? That he carefully recalled what Wade said just now, and finally extracted a small part of the content that he could barely understand. They can buy everything from all over the world at home. Wade smiled. Actually, the earliest online shopping started about 10 years ago, and it will definitely develop more conveniently in the future, but I actually don't know much about this aspect. Wade is not an expert in computers. In his previous life, he was only at the level of an ordinary college student. Most of the C language programming he learned was returned to the teacher after the exam, reborn in this world. Because he understood the future development of computers, Wade thought about delving into this technology and making WeChat, Douyin, shopping websites, smartphones, etc. available in advance, so that he might be able to become a world's richest man. But Wade's studies had just begun, and he received the admission notice to Hogwarts, the world's richest man and magic. Vader only hesitated for 0.1 seconds before choosing the latter. Michael said in disbelief, but I just saw that what you said was very reasonable. I just said some things I saw in magazines. It sounds very bluffing, right? Wade leaned on the carriage and said with a smile, you don't understand, and Pruitt and the others must not understand either. I don't understand, but I am very confident. They will think that I know a lot, but they can't communicate with me, so they have to stay away, otherwise they will feel uncomfortable just listening. Merlin. Theo said with emotion, I thought you were a computer expert among Muggles. I have watched their TV, and what the expert said on it was not as difficult to understand as you said. For a moment, Theo wondered if what he heard was English, or if Muggles had invented a language specifically for their computers. By the way, Wade seemed to have mentioned this concept just now. What computer language? C, C++, Java, Python. Theo was lost in thought. So Muggles really did this. A machine was invented, and many complex languages were invented for this machine. I think you seemed a little nervous just now. Wade asked Michael, what are they all about? They are one of the more troublesome groups of purebloods, the kind of people who might readily defect to the past if you know who were to come back. Michael said, Jan Pruitt, you may not have noticed it before. He is a 6th-year Ravenclaw student. He is keen on holding various large and small parties in the lounge. Even if the defense against the dark arts course is just he also got excellent in the OWLS exam through self-study, but he is better at all kinds of small curses. He is narrow-minded and it is best not to provoke him. Ryan sighed and said, I used to, before I entered Hogwarts, I thought Ravenclaws were all nerds who study hard. Did you see the look of that Pruitt? He looked like I wish I could serve as a pawn for Yaxley. Because Pruitt is not the real Pruitt. Theo recalled, I seem to have heard someone say that his great-great-grandmother married a mixed-race wizard named Dion or Dick. Later, pure wit after the publication of the bloodline list, their family changed their surname to Pruitt, one of the 28 sacred tribes. Then what? Wade asked curiously, did the Pruitt family recognize this relative? No, they have never been recognized by the Pruitt family. But both Pruitt brothers were killed in the war against you-know-who and the Death Eaters. Pruitt Yam Pruitt's father and uncle are now high-ranking officials in the Ministry of Magic. They claim to be pure-blooded Pruitt, and no one cares about them. Theo looked at the expressions of everyone listening to the gossip and said with a smile, actually, the school. The closest ones to Pruitt are the Gryffindor Weasleys. Weasley? Everyone was surprised. Yes, Ron Weasley's mother's surname was Pruitt, and the two brothers who died that year were her brothers. Theo said. Are they all dead? Ryan asked. Yes. It was terrible, I mean the war, thankfully it's over. Ryan silently thanked Harry Potter in his heart, even though the boy did not show any extraordinary excellence or power, he really saved the world, and this alone was enough. Many people, including Ryan's parents, are grateful and respectful of the boy who survived. What about Yaxley and Foley? Wade asked. Yaxley, Theo's face turned pale, his father used to work for you-know-who, just like Malfoy. After you-know-who disappeared, they all claimed that they were under the influence of the Imperius Curse and escaped punishment with money. Unlike Malfoy, his father is still working in the Ministry of Magic. He is said to be a cruel and cold-blooded person. I have no doubt that Yaxley must be good at using dark magic. Michael was surprised. Even if they are really controlled by the Imperius Curse, they must have done a lot of bad things, right? And they still stay in the Ministry of Magic as officials? Yes, that's right. Theo said with a wry smile, it's incredible, isn't it? Michael was silent. This smart boy suddenly felt that the majestic image of the Ministry of Magic in his heart began to collapse. As for the Fry family, Theo continued, their family was once a follower of Grindelwald. After that man was defeated by Dumbledore, the witch party also disappeared from people's sight, and the Fry family kept a low profile. But no matter what, the witch party was once a more terrifying existence than the Death Eaters, so you must be extra careful of him. The Carriage was quiet for a long time. Michael and Ryan, both of them are half-blood wizards, and they don't know much about the families, forces, and wars that have happened in the wizarding world. Some things will not be recorded in the history of magic. Little wizards like them who were born in peacetime mostly think that war is a story in textbooks and a crazy test point in exams, but they don't know that the shadow covered by the wings of war is among their classmates. Thinking of Professor Quirrell who was possessed by Voldemort in the school, and then thinking of those classmates who may yearn to become Death Eaters, the young children couldn't help but sigh deeply, feeling very heavy. The journey was very peaceful afterwards. Occasionally, there were some students who came to watch the inventor of the Book of Friends, but Wade used the internet concept as a weapon to end the topic in a few minutes. When he was about to get off the train, no one came to talk to him about these annoying topics. The train slowly stopped at Hogsmeade Station. The students changed into thick clothes and got off the train. In the distance, the brightly lit Hogwarts was waiting for them. Chapter 64, Carriage, Thestral. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Follow me, students. A loud voice sounded. Hagrid, who looked like a wild man, was waiting for them on the dark platform, wearing a thick fur coat and holding a lantern, like a burly giant. For students who don't understand Hagrid's inner self, his appearance is really intimidating. The originally noisy students immediately fell silent and followed Hagrid as they walked forward along the platform. There were many dark carriages parked in a wide open space, with dim lights hanging on both sides of the carriages, and some carriages would sway slightly. The students boarded the carriage one after another. Wade and others walked forward together, and suddenly heard a voice saying hello. Hey, Wade, guys, this carriage is empty. They looked up and saw Hermione, Padma, Parvati and Neville all sitting in the same carriage. Padma was the one who spoke. She pointed to the side and saw an empty carriage parked next to it. It was covered with straw. Several people climbed onto the carriage one after another, and Michael waved first and said, "Hello, did you have a good holiday?" "Excellent, except that one person has never looked at the Friends account." Hermione said, "I originally thought it would be easier to discuss the problem on the Friends account. Especially when I was studying the disarming spell." "Oh, Hermione, wait a minute, we haven't started school yet." Padma stopped her with a headache. "Let's talk about it tomorrow, okay? Let's talk about studying tomorrow." Even if she was a Ravenclaw, she would still find Hermione's enthusiasm for learning intimidating. "Meet you at the library tomorrow afternoon." Wade suggested, I just want to borrow some new books. Hermione had no choice but to sit back with regret, while Parvati next to her quietly breathed a sigh of relief. Although no one urged her to study, she felt as if she was trapped in an invisible glass cover and was about to suffocate when she listened to the top students discussing their studies, but she couldn't understand or participate at all. While they were talking, Neville jumped out of the carriage in a panic, clutching his toad leaf tightly, and squeezed into Wade's carriage. Hey, Neville, we've got enough people here. Michael protested. Please, let me stay here, there are girls over there. Neville begged in a low voice, looking like he was suffering greatly, but his body pushed Michael into the corner without hesitation, refusing to go down even if he said anything. Michael, who was forced to sit close to the carriage, said angrily, What's wrong with being with girls? The ones sitting next to you are the most beautiful girls in Hogwarts. They're also twins. There was clear laughter from the girls, not sure if it was because they heard Michael's words. Neville lowered his head helplessly, not daring to see who was laughing, and whispered, They are always laughing, it's so embarrassing, I can't stay there alone. Michael cursed angrily, Neville, you are such a hopeless idiot, that he jumped out of the carriage without hesitation before it moved, and went straight to the girls' carriage. After a while, I got in the car and started chatting and laughing with Padma. Neville breathed a sigh of relief and looked very impressed. Vader and the three of them couldn't help but burst out laughing, and Neville chuckled and scratched his head in embarrassment. The carriage moved swaying, the road was not very smooth, and the carriage bumped along with it. There was a musty smell in the carriage, and there was a thick layer of straw under the buttocks. Ryan couldn't help but said, I wanted to ask the last time I took a car, why is there no cushion in this car? That when they went home for Christmas, they also took these carriages to Hogsmeade Station. However, when they left the academy, they were with people from their own academy and had no chance to get together. Theo guessed, maybe it's to follow tradition, it's not like there's no funds, right? Anyone who has seen the scene at Hogwarts during normal meals will not think that the school cannot afford a few soft cushions. A school that provides food and accommodation and does not charge tuition fees, what else can we ask for? Just think of it as a test for us, Wade said, lighting the straw pile on the car with his wand, and the withered yellow straw suddenly turned into a thick cushion. Several people touched the mats and said enviously, Oh, the transformation technique is so difficult. Under Vader's guidance, their grades in the charms class were all good, but most of the transfiguration classes had to be done on their own, and Vader couldn't put firm beliefs and clear images into their minds. Do Muggle schools charge fees? Theo asked curiously. Wade thought about the primary school he went to and said, public primary schools are basically free and only charge a small amount of miscellaneous fees. But private schools cost at least £10,000 a year. £10,000? Theo was confused, how much is this? About 2,000 galleons, Vader said. Theo was stunned, it's so expensive, Muggles are really rich, that even if he was a pureblood, it would be impossible for his family to spend 2,000 galleons a year to send him to school. Maybe he would have to be as rich as the Malfoy family to afford school, right? Most Muggle students also go to public primary schools. Wade said. Speaking of which, these carriages in the school are really good and can drive automatically. Are they also alchemy items? Ryan asked curiously. Neville suddenly raised his head, pursed his lips, and wanted to say something, but held back. No, it seems like there is an invisible horse pulling. Michael probed his head, listened carefully. Several people held their breath and listened carefully. The invisible creatures in the air heard the sound of hissing breathing, snoring, and the sound of wings flapping the air. A horse that can be invisible. Ryan frowned and thought, I seem to have seen this kind of creature in some book. It's Thestrals. Vader revealed the answer. Yes. Ryan clapped his hands excitedly, it's the Thestrals. Legend has it that only people who have witnessed death with their own eyes can see them, that's why we can't see them. So, they are not invisible, but people can't see them? Theo frowned and sorted out the logical relationship. Yep. Wade responded casually, nodded, and looked towards the front of the carriage. The skinny black horse has a pair of white, pupilless eyes, and a face as ferocious as a dragon. It meekly pulled the carriage forward, its huge bat wings folded gently at its sides. Maybe it was because Ryan's voice was a little loud, so it raised its head uneasily and sped up its pace slightly. The wheel turned creakingly and finally stopped in front of the stone steps of the castle. Vader jumped out of the carriage. The night air is very cold, and the breath you exhale turns into white mist. He turned around and met Yechi's pale, empty eyes. This feeling is very strange. No wonder that in ancient times, people equated seeing the Thestrals with seeing death, and believed that the Thestrals would bring disaster to those who saw them. "What are you waiting for, Wade?" Ryan patted his back, stamped his feet and said, "It's really cold today," that the student stepped on the snow and stone steps and couldn't wait to enter the castle. At the corner of the foyer, Filch glared angrily at the children who had brought muddy water into the castle. The lights in the auditorium were brightly lit, and the house elves still prepared a sumptuous dinner. Dumbledore sat on the teacher's bench and looked at the new students with a smile. Chapter 65, The House of Requests. You are listening at Mtlnovel Audio. In the early morning, the bedroom was still dark. While Wade was sleepy, he suddenly felt someone looking at him. In the dormitory where he was alone, the sight that did not belong to him was particularly obvious. Wade opened his eyes drowsily, and suddenly saw a row of huge, shining eyes in the darkness, like small lanterns floating in the air. Boom! His heart twitched violently. Vader sat up suddenly, subconsciously grabbed the wand and pointed it at him. "Who is it?" "Mr. Grey is awake." The house elf's shrill voice sounded. "Zoe knows that Mr. Grey will return to the castle today, and Zoe has been waiting." His slender fingers snapped in the air, and the oil lamp in the dormitory immediately lit up. The three house elves stood side by side on the floor in the center of the dormitory, not realizing how scary it was for them to appear like this in the middle of the night. They looked at Vader with a warm smile on their faces. Wade felt that his rapidly beating heart almost hurt his ribs. He took a deep breath, his cold fingers gradually became warmer, and his scalp still had a tremor like an electric shock. "Zoe, Happy, Phil," Wade said as calmly as possible, "long time no see, why did you suddenly show up in the middle of the night?" That the elves bowed deeply, swayed their big ears, and said happily, "It's like this. For Christmas, Phil received another gift from Vader Grey." But Vader Grey must have noticed, he didn't get a gift from Happy. It's not that there are no gifts, but because Zoe has prepared a better one. Phil wanted to give Wade Grey the gift he really wanted. But what did Wade Grey want? Phil thought and thought. While cleaning in Ravenclaw Tower, Hubby heard the words of the first years, and then Hubby finally knew. That the three house elves smiled happily and said in unison, "Wade Grey will definitely want a broom." "I do want it." Wade sat on the bed and looked at them and said, "But the school regulations prohibit freshmen from bringing brooms into the school. Otherwise, he could actually buy a new one himself during the Christmas holidays." "There are indeed rules, but Vader Grey will not break the rules." Zoe opened her arms and said, "Because the broom is already in the school, Vader Grey just uses it. As long as the first-year students perform well in the flying class, it is of course possible for them to borrow the upperclassmen's broomstick to fly for a while after class. When the Quidditch teams of various colleges are training, there are often some little wizards waiting around the field, just to wait for them to finish training and borrow brooms to have fun, but it is impossible for a house elf to steal a student's broom, nor to give him a school broom as a gift. Did you find a lost broom?" Wade looked at the elves and asked in surprise. More than one." Happy waggled his ears. "There are several. A broom without an owner. Come with Zoe, Vader Grey." The elf pulled his finger and said, "Zoe wants to take Vader Grey to get his gift." "Oh, okay, wait, let me put on some clothes." Wade lifted the quilt and sat up, looking at the elves again. Can you guys step away for a while?" On a January morning, the sky was very dark, the cold wind blew against the windows, and there was even a layer of frost condensing on the windowsill. Vader followed the three house elves and walked in the empty corridors of the castle, and could clearly hear the echo of his own footsteps. It was almost early in the morning, and even Filch was not patrolling around, waiting to catch students who violated the curfew. It seemed that Vader was the only one left in the entire castle, as if he was walking in an ancient oil painting. Vader, who was wearing thick clothes, looked at the house elf who was still wearing only a thin tea towel, and couldn't help but ask, "You guys are wearing so little, don't you feel cold?" Phil shook his head and said, "It's not cold." Phil can adapt to different environments, summer, winter, very cold, very hot, whatever. What a strange creature, Vader looked at them deeply, what a strange and powerful creature this is. It does not rely on a wand like a wizard. It is born with the ability to cast spells without a wand. It also possesses outstanding and unique magic. It has powerful magic power and can also operate without limit. If wizards hadn't planted thoughts of absolute obedience and house elves must be enslaved by wizards in their genes or souls, they might be more dangerous to wizards than fire dragons. In history, goblins have had many rebellions, always fighting for the rights of the race. But even if house elves are abused and killed by wizards, they will not resist, or even disobey their master's orders. Therefore, ordinary wizards almost always look forward to having their own house elves, but wizards who have house elves rarely treat them well. These house elves who belong to Hogwarts are treated well among their kind, at least the students do not take pleasure in abusing them. Vader lowered his eyes and followed the elves along the corridor for a long distance, sometimes going down 2 flights of stairs, sometimes going up several floors, and then arrived near Gryffindor Tower. The empty corridor had a white wall with nothing on one side, and on the opposite side was a tapestry of a giant wizard in a hat teaching the trolls how to dance ballet. The trolls all turned their heads to look at them. Wade suddenly thought of a place, and he suddenly felt a great expectation in his heart. He asked softly, "What is this place?" "The come and go room, Mr. Gray." Zoe said, "We also call it the room of requirement. It will only appear when others really need it. You need to walk through this wall 3 times and concentrate on what you need." Habby said, and walked to the front of the wall, muttering to himself, "Habby needs a place to hide things, a place to hide things, a place to hide things." He walked back and forth, and when he passed by for the 3rd time, a smooth door suddenly appeared on the wall, with a shiny and warm copper handle on the door. Phil stood on tiptoe, pulled the copper handle hard, and the door was slowly opened. Wade couldn't help holding his breath. It seemed as if there was a city with high walls in front of him, with countless abandoned debris piled up inside, forming a hill of streets, broken furniture, rusty weapons, statues cut off by black magic, Muggle cannons, thousands of books, various banned dangerous toys, and glass bottles containing unknown potions. His heart was beating fast. The 3 house elves showed him a broom that was wiped and tidied and tied with an old red ribbon with proud and joyful smiles on their faces. "This is a Christmas gift for Mr. Gray," they said loudly. "It's the best one here. It's a little old, but it can still fly well." Phil added softly, "No." Wade thought, this room of requirement that he had been looking for a long time is the real gift. He grabbed the broom and a surprised smile appeared on his face, as if the whole room became brighter because of it. His smile was very contagious, making the 3 elves also show silly and satisfied smiles. Chapter 66, The Elves and the Portraits. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Although Vader had enough galleons in the Gringotts vault to buy 10 more of the latest broomsticks, he still showed great joy at the elves' gifts and shared with them the ones he had brought from home. Candy. When he was changing clothes and going out, he grabbed a pack and stuffed it into his pocket. "This is made by Muggles. It has no magic, but it has a rich flavor and is very delicious." Vader introduced them to them. The elves looked flattered and hesitated for a while. But because this was not the first time that they and Vader exchanged gifts, several house elves quickly calmed down and accepted the candies, thanking them with great gratitude. "Would Wade Gray want breakfast?" Phil asked respectfully. "At this time, most of the breakfast in the kitchen has been prepared." "Okay," Wade said decisively. Phil found a clean old mat from the junk pile, and Zoe and Habby left the room of requirement. Soon after, at the same time, one person came back with a large dinner plate filled with food. The other one was holding a large can of drink, which was Wade's favorite orange water. Hubby and the others knelt on the ground, laid out the tablecloth, and put food and drinks on them. Wade also sat down, and then he saw the elves getting up and standing next to them. but they still held candies in their hands and looked at them with smiles. With Vader, some thoughts suddenly flashed through Wade's mind. He raised his head and said in surprise, "What are you standing for?" "Everyone, sit down, this is our breakfast meeting." Sit down." Zoe stammered, "We." "Of course." Wade imitated her words, and then smiled. "Is there anyone else here?" That the three house elves looked at each other, their expressions even more excited than when they received Vader's gift for the first time, as if sitting down was an unimaginable honor. But they seemed to have their hands and feet tied up. They didn't move for a long time, and their big eyes were a little frightened. Wade emphasized his tone slightly and invited again, "Please sit down, aren't you willing to have breakfast with me?" "Of course, willing." Zoe struggled to breathe as if out of breath, and then carefully sat down next to Wade. Then came Happy, who acted a little braver and sat down opposite Vader, hand and foot. Then there was Phil, who swayed, and with the encouragement of his two companions, he sat down in the corner, his slender fingers unconsciously clasping the tablecloth. Then, Vader looked at the three house elves and announced, "Let the breakfast party begin." That he took the lead in picking up the meat pie, and then gave one to each of the elves, and ate them casually. After a while, there was a faint sound of sobbing in the air. Big tears fell from the house elf's tennis ball-sized eyes. "Weird, so weird," hubby choked while wiping his tears. "Habby is very happy, why are he crying?" Vader said nothing and touched its ugly little head with pity. Phil and Zoe swallowed the pie in big mouthfuls with bitter tears mixed in their stomachs. In the shadows of old furniture, a wizard and three house elves sat together for the first time and finished their breakfast in a place where light and dark alternated. Monday in Ravenclaw still starts with the less popular potions class. The room of requirement is on the 8th floor of the castle, and the potions classroom is in the basement. Wade was too lazy to climb the stairs, so he simply flew down on his broom and circled around the castle twice before landing in the central courtyard. When he landed on the ground, Wade's fingers were almost frozen, and his ears and nose were also red from the cold. Facts have proved that winter is not a suitable season for flying. Even if there is a warming spell, it will still be cold under the strong wind. Snapped, hubby suddenly appeared. He handed Wade's schoolbag to him, then took the broom diligently, stared at Wade with eyes full of admiration, and said excitedly, "Habby will help Wade Gray put the broom in dormitory." "Thanks for your help, Happy," Vader said with a smile. The harpy bowed deeply, his long nose almost touching the ground, and then he disappeared with his broom. Wade had already had breakfast and originally planned to go directly to the potions classroom. But when the whole body was shivering with cold, the damp and cold underground suddenly became disgusting, and the auditorium with the roaring fire was full of attraction. Wade walked up the steps, crossed the foyer, and sat for a moment in the auditorium. At this time, there were already some struggling 5th grade students sitting at the long table. Most of them had messy hair and looked troubled and helpless. They were eating breakfast and reading, or reading breakfast and eating books. It looked almost broken. Wade did not dare to disturb these stupid high school students. He sat quietly for a while, read a chapter of the potions lesson, and quietly left the auditorium after his body recovered. "Hey, Wade, long time no see." As he walked through the foyer, a familiar voice spoke. "Griffiths?" Wade looked over in surprise. "Yes, it's me." The red-haired wizard was lying on a tall picture frame. The original owner of the picture was squeezed into a corner by him. He looked like he was too angry to speak, and stared angrily from behind. "Griffiths. I haven't seen you for a holiday. Did you miss me?" Griffiths said cheerfully, It seems that you had a very pleasant holiday. Your face seems to be a little rounder." "I am different." He rolled up his sleeves and pointed to a bruise on his arm and said to Wade, "Did you see it? Someone beat me up. We haven't seen each other for a few years, but I feel that everyone has become unfamiliar, and my temper has become so irritable." "Are you sure it's not because of you that you became irritable?" Wade secretly complained, looked at the poor wizard whose territory was occupied by the bully, and asked Griffiths, "Aren't you in the corridor? Why are you in the hallway again?" "No, my painting is still in the corridor." Griffiths shook his finger and smiled, They only said that there is no room in the hallway, but they didn't say that I can't visit. Dumbledore won't have any objections to me visiting old friends who have been reunited after a long time. Hey, little guy. In a painting next to him, an old man wearing a top hat suddenly shouted at Wade, "You brought this guy out of the astronomy tower, right? Please, send him back quickly." Yes, yes. The surroundings seemed to be sleeping. The old men and women who were asleep all shouted, "Send him back, send him back. We finally got him to the astronomy tower, why did you get him out again? Do you know how annoying he is? My hair is falling out in clumps." You are a portrait, your hair won't fall out. I am describing it. Describing it. Do you understand? Don't find fault with my words. I am just telling the truth. Why are you so angry? Can't we just communicate properly? Who will drag this guy down? The portraits, which were usually quiet, suddenly quarreled among themselves. The students who got up early for lunch were very surprised and watched with great interest nearby. Wade quietly left the hallway. Griffiths didn't care about the noise caused by him. He walked through the portraits without hesitation, and even woke up some of the guys who were really asleep, and followed Wade out of the hallway. Noisy guys, right? Griffiths said with a smile, house elves are much quieter than them. Wade stopped and looked at Griffiths. Chapter 67 A Busy Day. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Their eyes met. After a moment, Wade walked forward again, asking, "Did you see it just now?" "Yeah." Griffiths nodded and said, "When I was visiting, I happened to see you and the house elf." The sign of a good house elf is that it does not let wizards discover its existence, and the house elves at Hogwarts have always been the best. Many students have never seen an elf until they graduate. Griffiths commented with a smile, "Naive little fools, they thought the castle had some magical housework magic that made their dirty clothes and shoes clean. Whether it will be seen by others is not the criterion for judging good or bad." Wade defended his little friend, "The harpy is also very good." "You are right." Griffiths nodded and said in agreement, and the fact that he did not refute a word made people feel a little weird. There were no portraits in the corridor ahead, and Griffiths had to stop and watch the little wizard of Ravenclaw go away. A Ravenclaw who made friends with the house elves, that he said to himself, and suddenly laughed, "Really just friends?" Wade suddenly found that the professor's attitude towards him became more gentle, and even Professor Snape gave him 2 extra points for the first time. You know, in the previous potion class, even if Wade's potions were almost perfect every time, Professor Snape would give him 1 point at most 3 times out of 10. Wade really wanted to take a picture of the astonished expressions of the Ravenclaws and Hufflepuffs in the classroom. Professor McGonagall, who was always strict, also let Wade stay alone after class and gave him a list of books. Transfiguration is the most magical magic. Professor McGonagall said with a smile, "If you can read these books carefully and understand them deeply, you will definitely go further on the road of transfiguration." "Thank you, Professor." Wade looked at the list of books. He had not read most of them, but the last few books seemed to be in the forbidden area of the library. "That's right. When you finish reading the previous books, you can come to me." Professor McGonagall looked at him expectantly and said, "I will sign your approval slip." Professor Flitwick naturally needs no mention. He promised that Wade could borrow any book from his private library at any time, and every time Wade went to ask questions, the candies and desserts on Professor Flitwick's table would be more abundant than usual. Professor Sprout's smile became more friendly, and she also lent Wade a few books on herbology after class. So Wade's time began to become more and more tight. In the morning, he would fly directly from the tower to the 8th floor of the main tower on his broomstick, and one of Zoe and the other 2 would rush to help him return the broom to the dormitory. He would transform the room of requirement into a fitness equipment or a swimming pool to exercise, and then transform it into a study to read books, prepare for his homework, and then have breakfast. During this time, there was always a house elf guarding nearby. If someone passed by nearby, they would remind him in the friend book to prevent him from bumping into anyone when entering and leaving the room of requirement. After that, if he had classes, he would naturally go to the classroom first. when he had no classes, Wade basically spent all his time in the room of requirement. If he wanted to practice magic, the room of requirement could provide relevant books and targets for spells. If he wanted to practice potions, there would be various types of crucibles, scales, fuels, measuring cups, etc., but he still needed to prepare the materials in advance. If he wanted to study alchemy and the gifts and tests given to him by Professor Murray, the various alchemy equipment was even more complete than that of Professor Murray. After dinner and before curfew, this is almost the fixed activity time of SSC. They gather in the Umbrella House to practice spells, complete the homework that has not been completed during the day, discuss and solve problems with each other, or just sit together and chat. In fact, with Wade's advanced learning progress, none of the SSC people can provide any valuable help to his study. This can be regarded as Wade's personal after-school tutoring class, and it doesn't charge money, but not everything needs to be thought from the perspective of mutual use and utilitarianism. The time spent with these partners is also very precious to Wade. Here, his brain and spirit can be fully relaxed, and he can also put down some thoughts that have been weighing on his mind. He can talk and laugh casually, which relieves the fatigue of a whole day of high-intensity study. Moreover, seeing that the originally clumsy Neville and others have made significant progress under his guidance, this joy and satisfaction even exceeds the joy of learning a new magic himself. After all, Wade is accustomed to the latter, and the former is always a surprise every time it appears. Positive emotions are always contagious. Every time the Umbrella House activity ends, everyone has a smile on their face. It would be great if we could suggest to the principal to postpone the school curfew for another hour. Padma packed up her books and said happily, "I have never felt so happy studying before." Even Neville nodded. As long as he was in the Umbrella House, he didn't even feel that studying potions was painful anymore. He still made mistakes frequently, but his friends around him would correct his mistakes in time, and no one scolded him. Next week is the Quidditch match between Gryffindor and Hufflepuff, right? Michael looked at the people from the two colleges with a searching look in his eyes. Yes. Hermione sighed worriedly. I heard that Professor Snape will be the referee. Then you are miserable. Padma said sympathetically, Professor Snape will definitely not judge impartially. Everyone knows how much he hates Gryffindor, especially when there is Harry in the team of your college. Potter. Almost no one in the entire school knew about Snape's targeting of Harry Potter, but several people who had been to the principal's office last time looked at each other with similar understanding in their eyes. At noon the next day, Hermione gave a signal in the auditorium, and several people gathered in the Umbrella House with tacit understanding to talk about this matter. Professor Snape should be sent by the principal to protect Harry Potter on the playing field, right? Ryan said, although Professor Snape has a bad temper, Professor Dumbledore must trust him so much. Because he is trustworthy. Michael played with his Quidditch star model, watching the little puppet being poked down and getting up again and again. He added with a smile, of course, point deductions and protection, these two things can be done at the same time without conflict. Ryan sighed, there are so many professors in the school, why does the principal send the one who hates Harry Potter the most? Chapter 68 Orphan. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Wouldn't this be more beneficial to you? Michael asked nonchalantly. That's right, but I think Cedric and the others would also prefer a fair game. Ryan said seriously. Well, it's indeed Hufflepuff. Michael sighed. Ryan said angrily, don't think I don't know that you actually mean to say I'm stupid. Ha ha ha, how could that happen? Michael said with a dry smile. Anyway, if it was Ravenclaw, he knew that his college would not miss such a great opportunity. Actually, Vader, I want to ask, Hermione was a little embarrassed and said with some pleading, can Harry also join the SSC? That the air suddenly became quiet. Ryan was a little uneasy. He saw the smile on Michael's face suddenly disappear, and he just looked at the brown-haired girl and then at Wade. Vader's expression didn't change at all, and he even agreed simply, of course. Harry Potter is not a difficult person to get along with. The problem is you, Hermione. Me? Hermione looked over anxiously. Have you forgotten that you were made angry by Ron Weasley? Potter and Weasley are inseparable. If he joins, he won't hide it from Weasley. Are you ready to forgive him? Vader asked gently. It seemed that he didn't have any objections, and all his considerations were based on concern for Hermione's mood. "Oh, this." Hermione breathed a sigh of relief and smiled relievedly. That incident has long since passed, and he also wanted to remind his friends later, didn't he? Although it didn't help, this after getting along for a while, I think Weasley is not that annoying anymore. It's impossible to hold a grudge for a lifetime just because of a quarrel, right? I think it's good to turn enemies into friends. Ryan took the initiative to speak to ease the tense atmosphere, and Ron Weasley's brothers are all excellent, so he must have a very outstanding side, right? This. Hermione probably doesn't agree very much. After she felt relaxed, she couldn't help but want to explain a few more words. Actually, I didn't intend to bring them in. Ron noticed that Neville had made great progress and asked him several times, but Neville didn't say anything. But you all know that Harry, if the Death Eaters and the you-know-who come back, Harry will be the first to be found, but he is not very outstanding in studies, his grades are so-so, and he has no spells taught in class. If you are familiar with it, you have to go to Quidditch training regularly. In Hermione's eyes, Harry Potter turned out to be a scumbag who had an empty reputation but didn't study hard at all. Later it was, a good scumbag who has a decent personality but still doesn't work hard enough, when he truly realized that Harry Potter lost his parents because of the war, and that his life is still being threatened by Voldemort and his remnants. Harry Potter had an aura of little pitiful in Hermione's eyes. What's the difference between having poor grades and being a little playful? How gratified his parents must be to see him growing up so happily and healthily. But then, Hermione felt even greater anxiety. She was a person who was prone to anxiety, thinking that Voldemort was close at hand, Quirrell was watching with eager eyes, and Dumbledore had mysterious and unknown plans, but Harry was just fooling around all day long, either piecing together his homework or borrowing other people's to copy. Hermione almost wanted to pry his head open and tuck her own anxiety into a ball. There is no doubt that Harry Potter will face huge challenges and dangers in the future, and those are definitely not something that he can cope with just by copying his homework. Hermione tried to teach them all the spells she learned in the Umbrella House, but the problem was, when Vader taught them, she felt it was very clear and easy to understand, and she taught Harry and Ron the same way. It was as if his brain had been hit by a giant monster, and he didn't understand it for a long time. Hermione didn't know why, she just felt very grumpy. Sometimes she doubted the IQ of those two people, but looking at Neville's progress, she had to admit that maybe there was something wrong with her own teaching methods. If Harry wants to improve his abilities as soon as possible, joining SSC seems to be the only option. The only thing better than this is that Dumbledore himself is willing to tutor Harry, but how is this possible? So, despite knowing that it was extremely presumptuous and might even make others unhappy with her, Hermione made the request. Fortunately, Wade agreed. After joining the SSC for so long, Hermione naturally understood that as long as Vader agreed, no one else would be a problem. Why did you agree? Michael couldn't help but ask when there were only two people left. What about Harry Potter? Wade asked knowingly. Of course. Michael said seriously, Vade, I don't think you don't know how much trouble Harry Potter means. I thought you wouldn't like this kind of trouble. Well, I really don't like it. Vader leaned back in his chair and said, but if it's Harry Potter, then of course we can make an exception. But, Michael frowned, puzzled. After such a long time, even Neville should have understood, he is just an ordinary boy, who escaped from the death curse for some unknown reason, and for some reason. The reason is that the mysterious man disappeared that night, and the whole world put the title of Savior on his head, as if the mysterious man was defeated by a baby. I originally thought he was born with powerful magic power. But Michael hesitated to speak. But after he went to school, he discovered that his intelligence and ability were not worthy of his reputation as the Savior Star. Wade looked out the window and said what Michael wanted to say but didn't. Michael breathed a sigh of relief. Yes, that's what I meant. He paused and then said, you should have seen it clearly, so you don't have any special expectations for Potter. But why? But Michael, Vader withdrew his gaze from the window, looked at his friend, and said, you shouldn't have forgotten that both Potter's parents died fighting the mysterious man, and they fought heroically to the end. On that night, Harry Potter not only became a savior, he also lost his closest family members. Yes, that's right, Michael's face turned red with shame and he stammered. So no matter what he did, or didn't do, it has nothing to do with any of this. Vader sighed, Harry Potter is the orphan of a martyr. The orphan of a martyr. Michael chewed the word, and suddenly understood why when he gossiped about Harry Potter with his parents did not allow him to say bad things about Harry Potter. Yes. Vader finally said, everyone who has escaped from the shadow of war and enjoys the peaceful life now has the obligation to take care of him, and children like him, right? Chapter 69 Grey Eyes. You are listening at Mtlnovel Audio. Michael has left. Wade turned his head and looked at the window glass. The figure in the glass has a pair of grey eyes. They are neither as deep as black eyes nor as bright as blue eyes. They are more like a quiet lake in autumn and winter, without any strong emotions. Sometimes, people who look at him will have a particularly cold feeling, and people can't help but guess whether he is equally cold in his heart. Through the reflection on the glass, you can see on the grounds outside the castle, a group of students carrying brooms, braving the rainy weather, walking across the lawn back to the castle. Their faces and bodies were covered in mud, as if they had rolled in the quagmire. They couldn't even see their faces clearly, but the thinnest figure among them was still particularly conspicuous. Then, a man in a turban shrank from the cold and trotted across the field of vision. After a while, another black bat-like figure strode into the castle. The sides of his robe were blown high by the wind, and the rain seemed to avoid him in fear. His face was gloomier than the cloudy sky, and all the students he met on the road ran away in panic. Wade couldn't help but smile slightly. Harry Potter, Voldemort, Severus Snape, Savior, Dark Lord, and former Death Eater, several people with contradictory identities and even murderous intentions are in the same castle, living in peace as teachers and students, just waiting for the moment when they finally meet. Thinking of Michael's expression as if his soul had been baptized when he left. The corners of Wade's mouth raised slightly. He cleared away the clutter on the table, organized his recent homework and notes, put on his school bag and headed to the astronomy tower, of course, let Harry Potter join, and even try to help him improve his strength. Otherwise, if Voldemort is resurrected, or gains greater strength due to some butterfly effect or the like, who will resist it? Is it Vader, who is still very weak at the moment? Is it Michael who hangs out with girls all day? Or is it Dumbledore who was cursed and fell from the tower in the plot? Harry Potter, despite all his shortcomings, such as recklessness, impulsiveness, lack of self-discipline, etc., even though he is good at only a few spells, and has not achieved excellence in other courses except defense against the dark arts, but it is undoubtedly a special killing weapon for ambush, not to mention when he was a baby, starting from school, Voldemort basically lost every year against Harry Potter. In the last year, Harry Potter had the help of God to find out Voldemort's hidden secrets in a very short time. All the Horcruxes that rose up finally completely buried the Dark Lord, but he himself was almost unharmed, be it the halo of the protagonist, or the Son of Luck. Vader currently does not have the strength to defeat Voldemort, so he will never refuse such a friend. Even if one day he is more powerful than Voldemort, he will not turn away Harry Potter. Things are unpredictable, and Harry Potter is always a powerful trump card. It was raining outside the castle, and streaks of lightning flashed across the sky. The bright light illuminated mottled shadows through the windows, flashing and disappearing suddenly. Bad weather, isn't it? Professor Murray poured a cup of hot tea, thought for a moment, added some milk and sugar, then sat on the chair and said comfortably, "Yes." Vader was also holding hot tea and said with a smile, "But I also feel that this kind of weather is particularly suitable for sleeping in. Muggles call this uniform and continuous sound white noise, and think it can shield sound at other frequencies, thereby improving sleep quality." As he became more and more familiar with Professor Murray, Vader learned about the professor's attitude towards Muggles and no longer tabooed talking to him about Muggle theories and technologies. White noise. Professor Murray thought for a moment and smiled. They always have some wonderful and weird research, don't they? I also saw research report. It seems to be a study of the human ring finger, the relationship between length and wisdom. But there are also some very interesting studies, such as the interaction between dreams and reality, time travel, forms of alien life, etc. Vader thought for a while and said with some yearning, "They are still heading beyond the Earth. Exploration, if interstellar travel can really be realized, I would really like to be a passenger. I'm looking forward to it too, but at my age, I'm afraid I won't see that day. If you live well, it's still possible, or you can refine the philosopher's stone like Mr. Mtlnovel." Murray the professor chuckled and said. Wade also smiled, "I have read in books that the magic stone can create the elixir of life. Is Mr. Nick Flame still the same as he was when he was young?" That he still remembered that Nick Flamel in the movie was like a walking pale ghost, with bones so crisp that they could break at the touch of a touch. He wondered if it would be different in this world. Well, Professor Murray pondered for a moment, then said, "I can only say, the elixir of life can indeed allow the owner to escape death, but the cumulative effect of 6 centuries is terrible, and the potion cannot completely offset it. This kind of effect. Then such immortality seems to be meaningless." Wade tilted his head and thought for a moment before saying, "Professor Murray couldn't help but smile, only a child in your prime would say this without hesitation. When you are as old as me, you will understand that when people are approaching the end of their lives, they have to pay attention to death. Fear and attachment to life will make us fear death and long for a longer existence." Would Professor Murray think so? Wade couldn't help asking. "I'm just a mortal, of course I would." Professor Murray stroked the teacup and said, "But Alba said something, death is a great adventure. No one knows what the world after death is like, it may be as terrible as the legend, or as beautiful as the legend, or just nothingness." Professor Murray seemed to recall something, paused for a moment, and suddenly murmured, "So I am afraid of death, but I also look forward to the arrival of that day. I will continue to go on and see what the scenery ahead is." Wade looked at him quietly. Professor Murray suddenly came back from his contemplation and smiled. "It's too early for you to say this. By the way, do you have the answer to the question I left for you before?" "Yes." Wade took the small box out of his pocket and put it on the table, saying in a disapproving tone, "But Professor, this is too expensive. The value of a gift does not lie in how much it costs, but in how you will use it." Professor Murray said in a kind and encouraging tone, "Tell me what you think." Wade opened the box. "This is a piece of bird snake skin. Stephen introduced this creature to me. Its body can stretch at will. It can become as big as a dragon, or it can get into a small teapot. It usually feeds on insects and mice." Professor Murray nodded and asked, "Well, what else?" Wade took a deep breath. "Is the best material for the traceless extension spell." Chapter 70 Box and Crown. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Tell me about your understanding of the traceless extension spell. Professor Murray continued to say with a smile. "Yes." Wade said seriously, "The traceless extension spell is a space-based spell. I guess it should be able to achieve space extension and space folding at the same time. This spell can be applied to any material, metal, soil, cloth, wood, and the premise of use is a closed, limited space. In theory, the traceless extension spell can expand space from finite to infinite, but in actual application it will be affected by various factors, the most direct of which is the material and the wizard's magic power, and the understanding of the spell." Professor Murray nodded slightly. "Most of what Wade said can be found in the book, but it is not an easy task to integrate it. What's more, there are also Muggle theories and his own thoughts in it, which can be regarded as an excellent paper if written down. It can be seen that he did a lot of homework in advance, and this serious and rigorous attitude is what Professor Murray appreciates most. In summary, the traceless extension charm is extremely difficult to use and can be easily abused. Therefore, it is strictly controlled by the Ministry of Magic." Wade paused here, glanced at Professor Murray, and then continued with his smiling eyes. "Ministries of magic in various countries have regulations that the traceless extension charm cannot be used for private purposes, and can only be used for the production of individual items approved by the relevant Ministry of Magic. At the same time, wizards are not allowed to possess items for the traceless extension charm without the approval of the Ministry of Magic." Professor Murray couldn't help laughing. "Yes, we are now discussing how to violate the laws of the Ministry of Magic. But Wade, if you are an alchemist but don't have a suitcase with the traceless extension charm, you can't be considered a real alchemist. Of course, in order to avoid trouble from the Ministry of Magic, we also need to learn some hidden means. He raised his hand and summoned a book from the shelf and handed it to Wade. This book contains a clever trick that can teach you how to make your box appear ordinary at ordinary times, and change into another appearance when you need it. It's very difficult, child, whether it's the box of the traceless stretching spell or this hiding spell, it's very difficult. I look forward to your performance, and, yes, you can ask me any questions. Weeder flipped through the book, put it away carefully, and then took out a piece of parchment. In fact, I do have a lot of questions to ask you. On the parchment, there were a full list of 20 or 30 questions, none of which could be explained in 2 or 3 sentences. Oh, very studious, isn't it? Professor Murray muttered, then put on his glasses and began to answer them one by one. Wade immediately took out a pen and paper and began to take notes. When the QA session ended, it was actually far beyond the scheduled tutoring time. Professor. Before leaving, Wade said again, I actually have one more thing. Well, what? Professor Murray was already a little tired, but still said patiently. It's like this. I took some time to make a box these days. I would like you to help me see if there are any flaws. Wade pulled out a long oak box from the bottom of his school bag. It looked ordinary, and there was not even any obvious trace of magic. Professor Murray chanted a spell and checked it carefully. Can it block the smell of magic items? No, it should be said to be isolated. There are also anti-theft spells, anti-alcohol opening, curse-breaking spells, anti-evil spells. He looked at Wade in surprise. Are you going to collect some powerful black magic items? Wade smiled a little embarrassedly. Actually, I want to borrow some books from the restricted area, but I heard that some books themselves come with powerful black magic, and they will be affected as long as they are close to them. Professor Murray laughed out loud. Oh, Wade, my child, you are a little too cautious. He laughed for a while, and seeing Wade getting more and more embarrassed, he wiped the tears from the corners of his eyes and said, Don't worry, when the books in the restricted area are borrowed by students, Madam Pants will do some processing to avoid any bad influence on the students. Wade blushed slightly, and said a little frustrated, So, did I prepare this box in vain? Oh, it's not that bad. It is always better to be cautious. Professor Murray comforted him, Your box is made perfectly. Most of the black magic items can be completely isolated and will not have any adverse effects on the outside world. At least when you go to bed at night, you can use it to pack dangerous books. Ved didn't seem to be completely relieved yet, and asked, What are the small part of black magic items that cannot be completely isolated? It depends on the size, kid. Professor Murray still had a smile in his words. If it can't be completely packed, the magic power will naturally leak out. But if it can be completely sealed from beginning to end by your box, you don't have to worry about any black magic power. In the dead of night, a figure wandered back and forth on the 8th floor of the castle. I need a place to hide things, a place to hide things, a place to hide things. The familiar door appeared again, and Wade opened the door without hesitation and walked in, and lit up the surroundings with his wand. In the room that looked like a city, the stacked furniture made the surrounding shadows look bizarre. Wade searched along the middle passage section by section, and finally saw his target next to a cabinet with bubbling surface. The old, rusty crown was placed on the pile of junk. It looked no different from other garbage here, even more worn out. The gray gems on it looked like unpolished stones. Above the crown, there were the words, Tom Riddle. If it weren't for this line of words, Wade really couldn't determine his target in this garbage pile. Because he vaguely remembered that the crown seemed to be placed in a box, and it looked gorgeous, not this gray appearance, but in any case, the memory of more than 10 years ago was unreliable, but his eyes did not deceive him. Wade opened the box and put it on the ground. He picked up an old fire tongs from the nearby garbage pile, stretched out his arms to pick up the crown from a distance, threw it into the oak box, covered it with a lid, and sealed it with heavy spells, and then relaxed his tense mood. With this crown, Wade couldn't study the functions of the room of requirement as he wished. He was afraid that he would be affected by the crown if he was not careful. And Wade was also worried that others would discover the room of requirement because of his frequent visits, and then be confused by the Horcruxes like Ginny Weasley, causing a big mess. At this time, the Horcruxes were completely isolated, avoiding future troubles, and Wade couldn't help but feel a little excited. Just this room of requirement, he had too many unknowns to study. When leaving, Wade subconsciously pressed his schoolbag with his palm, but heard a voice suddenly say, "It's best not to take things out of the room of requirement, child."